The economics of a medieval scriptorium. The secret lies in the mold, not the book. Hello everyone, welcome back. We step into one of the most bizarre and luxurious industries in human history. No factories, no assembly lines, none but steam engines see it. They produced items around the 12th and 13th centuries. A single, beautifully decorated handwritten Bible could cost as much as an entire farm. Land, houses, livestock included. Not a metaphor. Recorded in real property contracts. So, why? Why was a book something we buy for a few dollars today, or read for free online so expensive? And more importantly, why actually made the money? And how? This is where it gets fascinating, because if you think the value of a manuscript lies solely in the labor of writing, you are only seeing half the picture. The other half, the real secret to profit, lies in something much more invisible. The system of patterns, molds, and reusable formulas, a business model, hauntingly similar to Gothic stained glass workshops. Let's break it down layer by layer. Before paper, Europeans wrote on vellum, or parchment, treated animal skin, usually calves, sheep, or goats. And here is the shocking number. To make a single, complete, giant Bible for a major monastery, you needed the skin of 200 to 250 calves. For extra-large editions, 300 to 500 animals. Imagine this. A monastery wants a book. Step 1 is not mixing ink. It is farming, raising calves, waiting for them to reach the right age, slaughtering them, then sending the skins through a brutal process: lime soaking, hair, scraping, stretching on wooden frames, drying, scraping thin, over and over. This takes weeks, sometimes months, requiring a specialized parchment maker, separate from the scribe, so before the scribe even touches his goose feather quill to the page, a massive chain of costs is already piled up. Farming, slaughter, labor, time. A book literally starts on a farm and gold leaf when the page becomes jewelry. Illuminated initials, gleaming with real gold. Gilding beaten so thin, thinner than paper. Glued down with egg white or plaster. Polished with agate stone or animal teeth, to shine like a mirror. This skill was so rare it required a dedicated specialist. The gilder paid as much as, or more than, the scribe. Gold wasn't just for beauty. In medieval thought, light reflecting from gold on sacred pages was divine light, encoded spirituality. But gold is still gold. Its price didn't drop for holy reasons. And the pigments, more expansive than gold by weight, mined in a single place on earth, Badakhshan, Madande, Afghanistan, shipped across thousands of miles, through countless hands, reserved almost exclusively for the cloak of the Virgin Mary, a stamp of supreme reverence, vermilion, bright red, extracted from mercury sulfide, stunning and deadly. Painters crushed this mineral into fine powder, inhaling mercury dust, destroying their nerves, trembling hands. Many medieval artists suffered poisoning without ever knowing why. Saffron yellow, Tyrian purple from sea snails, thousands of creatures for a tiny drop of color. The palette of an illuminated manuscript is a jewelry box, priced by rarity, distance, and danger. Total material cost: hundreds of animals, manual gold leaf, rare pigments from across the world. Now you understand. A medieval Bible was an investment asset, mobile real estate, hoarded like gold and silver. Labor, training a scribe took years. Young boys entering learning to read, mastering Latin, standardized scripts like Carolingian or Gothic textura, training the hand to write hundreds of pages. Artistry, theology, color, theory. A scriptorium was a professional school, feeding, housing, teaching. Long before any economic value was produced in the time, a complete, illuminated Bible took 1 to 2 years of full-time work. Larger projects, multiple years, and it wasn't just one person. An assembly line. 1. The parchment maker. 2. The ruler drawing faint guidelines. 3. The scribe writing the main text with oak or ink. 4. The rubricator adding red headings. 5. The gilder applying gold. 6. The illuminator painting illustrations. 7. The binder crafting leather covers, metal clasps, a specialized production line. Every step paid, every step adding to the final price and opportunity costs. In a monastery, every hour a monk spent copying a book was an hour not spent praying, farming, or serving the community. Opportunity cost. Only the wealthiest monasteries could afford a dedicated scriptorium, like a corporate R&D department. Split from daily operations. 2 business models. The monastic scriptorium, driven by faith, but bound by economics. preserving knowledge, serving liturgy, trading books, yet they calculated how many calves to raise, budget for gold and lapis lazuli, taking commissions from wealthy lords for land and privileges. Monasteries grew filthy rich, not just from selling books, but from the prestige that attracted royal and papal patronage. Then commercial scriptoria, the 13th century changed everything. Universities arose, Paris, Bologna, Oxford. Students needed textbooks, monasteries couldn't keep up. Secular commercial scriptoria emerged, driven purely by profit. In Paris, strictly regulated by the university, through a brilliant mechanism, the Petches system, the photocopy technology of the 13th century. Here is the problem. A thick textbook copied sequentially by one person takes forever, and the original master copy is locked away. No one else can copy it. The Petches solution, a verifying master copy, was disassembled into small booklets, parchia just a few pages each, rented out to different scribes simultaneously. Parallel processing, centuries before computers. Instead of one person working start to finish, many worked at the same time. Assembled later, production skyrocketed, prices dropped, process optimization in the medieval world. And now, the real twist. Look at a single manuscript. You think, a unique masterpiece. Its value is entirely within itself. Look closer at long-term operations. The real competitive advantage was not the book, it was a system of patterns. The molds start compared to stained glass workshops, Gothic cathedral windows. Did they draw freehand? No, they owned a repository of cartoons, full-scale master drawings, templates for holy figures, biblical scenes, reused over and over, adjusted slightly for color or size. The cartoon collection was the real asset, not any single window. A workshop with good templates won every contract. Scriptoria worked the exact same way. Pattern books, the secret recipe, illuminated initials, a dragon-wrapped bee, a Genesis in with creation scenes, not invented fresh every time, copied, tweaked, reused across dozens of books, order decorations, vines, flowers, marginalia, the workshop's signature style, drawn from a fixed inventory of visual elements, page layout templates, column ratios, margins, standardized templates passed down generations. Why is the mold better than the product? Reason 1. Saves creative time. No need to invent a new layout every time. Flip the pattern book. Pick a template. Adjust. Modern factory stamping. Reason. TWO. Brand consistency. Nobles saw a workshop's signature style, face shapes, color palettes. That's from Workshop X. Brand recognition in its infancy. Reason 3. The most important. The mold is transferable. Individual skill is not. A talented scribe dies. His skill vanishes. A pattern book stays. Passed from master to apprentice. Organizational knowledge capital. Turning fleeting individual talent into enduring collective asset. Modern standard operating procedures, SOPs. Companies relying on lone geniuses collapse when they leave. Companies relying on systems endure, guarded like martial arts secrets, trade secrets, pigment formulas, surface prep for gold leaf, kept strictly within the workshop, derived from proprietary pattern books. Famous case studies, the Book of Kells Celtic monks around 800 AD, astonishing, complex spiral designs. Yet research shows they followed strict, repeated geometric formulas, internal mold systems, passed down across generations of Irish and Scottish script. Even the wildest art has a systematic pattern. The Winchester Bible, 12th century England. Art historians tracking individual illuminator styles. One anonymous artist nicknamed Master of the Leaping Figures, repeating dynamic body postures, a personal mold signature, inside a larger workshop system. The Limbourg brothers, early 15th century, became the standard template, copied across France and Flanders. Layouts and scenes replicated, patterns breaking boundaries, becoming the common asset of an entire artistic school. The printing press, the economic earthquake of the 15th century, around 1450. Gutenberg, movable type in Mainz, German economic earthquake, shattering the scriptorium industry. Production costs plummeted. A machine made hundreds of copies in days. Handwriting skill lost its monopoly. Metal replaced the quill. But wait, the pattern survived. Calligraphy faded. Illumination did not die instantly. For decades after the printing press, printed books were still painted by hand, leaving blank spaces for manual using the exact same pattern books from centuries prior. When text production was automated, the decorative mold system. When technology threatens a business model, products die fast. Systems, molds, brands endure, they adapt to new production vehicles. Lessons for today. This isn't just history, it's a universal economic principle. Look around us now. Software, fashion, food, applying the exact same logic. A software company doesn't sell single lines of code. They sell frameworks, reusable libraries, system architecture. A restaurant chain doesn't sell just one dish. They sell standardized recipes, operational procedures, brand identity. A fashion house doesn't just sell a shirt. They sell patterns, silhouettes, design languages. The final product is just the tip of the iceberg. The bottom of the iceberg. Real competitive advantages, the mold, the system, the organizational knowledge. Medieval artisans intuitively understood this. Guarding the mold matters more than guarding a single product. The mold births 1,000 future products. A sold product is gone forever. So, from calfskin farms to lapis lazuli trade routes to pattern books guarded like treasure in 13th century Paris, what should you take away? Sustainable value rarely lies in the final object. It hides in the invisible, the system behind it, the mold, the formula, the repeatable process. A manuscript can burn, time can erode it, but the mold passed down, protected, nurtured, outlives every single product it creates. And perhaps that is the most timeless economic lesson left behind by anonymous medieval craftsman. Thank you for joining me today. See you in the next story.